I am the Senior Managing Director for Purdue's Institute for a Sustainable Future, and welcome to this webinar on AI and sustainable ag in the Midwest. We're really happy that you could join us. We are recording this as well, and we will have the Q&A available, and we encourage you to put any questions you have in there, and our panelists will try to answer some questions throughout the webinar, and also our respondent and Ankita Raturi will also bring some of those questions to the panel after we have the individual presentations. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ankita, and we will be turning off our cameras when we are not presenting to reduce distraction.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, cool. Thank you so much, Len. And for this part, I actually don't mind if you guys are around because I think I'm partially talking to my fellow panelists as well. But I'm really glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. But I wanted to start by taking a little bit of a zoom out and just really sort of thinking again critically a little bit about what it means for a technology to support different kinds of agricultural practices. If we zoom out of the individual tools, the trajectory of technological innovation reflects different kinds of societal ethos, right? So technologies can either reinforce social structures, they can change landscapes, they can shape our future. And really the design of technology is to actually create change in the world, right? So what matters then is how do we do it? Who are we including? What ingredients do we have? And really thinking about how we can innovate responsibly while attending to sort of the emergencies and challenges of today. And I'll give you a little quick example just to kind of do a little bit of scene setting. In the 1940s, so way back when the mechanical tomato harvester was first developed, it was an example of both opportunity and cost in action and intention, right? So researchers often use this example to depict the tension between short-term design priorities and long-term ripple effects, right? So this was a machine that was designed to be able to optimize on-farm profitability, right? Help us improve harvest efficiency and reduce the kind of dependencies that we have. But at the same time, it also encouraged plant breeders to create machine-friendly tomatoes, right? So things that had a thick skin where you could prioritize sort of harvest hardiness, so to speak, over flavor or texture. But it's not an either or, right? It's not as neat as I'm currently describing in this example. The tomato harvester forever changed how human tomato, human machine, human technology interactions play out. And it really sort of opened the door to thinking a bit more about how we humans and our technologies are actually co-evolving our world as also one of the ingredients that we're using as we're thinking about the design of tech. So in that sense, right, the digital revolution is well upon us. There are many open questions about how technology can and will likely change agricultural landscapes. And many of these open questions include questions around who benefits, who gets left behind, how we can develop different kinds of tools, right? Whether it's digital tools, AI systems, or even just cyber infrastructure to make us stronger and more sustainable. So there are many paths involved. There are many paths forward. Both ag and tech are really collaborative research activities. We're working across communities and disciplines, as we'll hear today. And really, it's a sort of collaborative act where we're balancing the needs of the many to pursue these shared goals. So, there's a lot of discussions around trust and mistrust in technologies, but the thing I want everyone to remember and even to just consider is that there are real people involved, right? So there are real people designing and working to create change. And so what really matters, at least in my opinion, is those relationships, right? The relationships between end user and technologist, between agriculture and technology, and thinking about how those relationships then translate to technological innovation, right? What is appropriate for one community might not always be appropriate for another. So then thinking about technological alignment is really around thinking about user needs in a much more nuanced way than simply checking off against a list of sort of generalized design principles. So in our discussion today, we'll first hear from 4 researchers who I think of as really critical thinkers about the human technology agriculture interface. I hope they surprise and delight you in the ways in which they imagine technology can be deployed to improve agricultural resilience. I really look at this group as one that embraces the potential of technology while still understanding the serious implications of technological change. And so I'll be back again later in the conversation with this group. But for now, I want you to just maybe think about some questions to consider as you listen, really thinking about who are the users of the tools, what might they need to do, and how is this group of researchers and technologists really shaping tools to meet the needs of our stakeholders across the Midwest. And with that, I'll hand over to Erin and
All
Seth.
right, thank you. Well,
So,
thank you, Ankita. I can actually, didn't expect that example to be where we started off today, but that was actually my grandfather's doctoral research here at Purdue was on tomato harvesters. And so, again, this is, lots of thinking about agriculture more broadly, and where we all come into this. And so, let me go ahead and just share some slides with all of you. And so, I need to go ahead and bring that up. And we should be good to go from there. So, all right. Well, good afternoon, or I guess we're still in the morning, and so good morning, everyone. One of the things that I was asked to do was to go ahead and just kind of broadly kind of set the stage for where technology is entering into agriculture at this point in time. And so, a lot of what I'm going to be speaking to is actually from my involvement in a project called the Diverse Corn Belt over the last 5 years, where we've been working with producers across the Midwest to really think about broader diversification and the role that technology plays within that. But one of the things that I also get to do today is I'm going to talk to you a lot about how we're using AI to visualize data, to visualize information, and how to co-design along with our community partners. And so the map that you're actually looking at here today that describes kind of the broader Corn Belt region within the United States. This is actually AI generated, and so you can see that there's a few errors along the way that pop up along with this. But our ability to go ahead and quickly visualize data is really one of the things that I'm going to be talking about and leveraging within my presentation. The other point that I wanted to make on this slide was just kind of setting kind of where we're at right now. And so on the right hand of the slide, what you're actually seeing is looking at kind of the economic returns for the corn and soybean rotation that dominates production across the Midwest. Now, I'm a social scientist. I'm not an economist. We actually will hear from an economist here in just a minute. But as a social scientist, I spend a lot of time talking with producers. And one of the things that comes up is when we start talking about the current system, a lot of the description comes back to the math isn't mathing. And what they mean by that is that when we look at the input cost versus the sales price of what they're getting for their commodity, a lot of farmers are actively looking for ways to innovate and maybe do something differently than the way we've done things in the past. Now, the corn economy has been very good to a lot of farmers, but again, there's struggles in this space, and that's kind of where our starting point is for kind of examining this landscape. But those farmers and those producers are also in a kind of a broader social system. And that's something that we wanted to talk about as well, just kind of setting the tone for this, is that there are a lot of different trends that are impacting agriculture here in Indiana. And Indiana, not unlike its other Midwestern counterparts, is dealing with a very large population shift. We are seeing population shift away from our rural areas. And so again, if I were to bring up a map of where we produce corn and soybeans in Indiana, one of the things that it would align very closely with what you see here in terms of population change, really over the last census, so 2010 to 2020. This kind of outmigration is something that is a really big part of the story for agriculture moving forward. And so certainly we're seeing kind of some economic restructuring. The pandemic was not kind to some of the small scale manufacturing that was maintaining our small towns and communities. So we certainly know of kind of outmigration of young adults, and so that we describe that as the brain drain. But the impact of that is fewer people developing and innovating and developing businesses in these communities. And so again, there's kind of this net shift of people kind of moving out of these rural areas. And again, Indiana is definitely part of that. I mean, part of the story, if I were to jump to the bottom left of this slide and say it's an erosion of services, we definitely are seeing school consolidations and hospital closures that are happening within these rural communities as well. Um, but then, you have to also shift to the bottom right of this and start thinking about where does technology come in? And certainly to focus on broadband access and the equity challenges of broadband access have been something that have been talked about pretty significantly. This becomes even more critically important as we start to talk about the role of technology and AI in this space as well. And so these are all things that we're thinking about as we discuss technology. And again, these broader kind of social changes are going to interact with how we adopt and how we use technology to innovate and go forward. So I just wanted to just share some simple results from you or with you from the Diverse Corn Belt Project. And so one of the things that one of our early products of this work was we conducted focus groups across the Midwest, and I just wanted to share a couple of findings out of these focus groups. One of the things as I'm kind of going through this is that what we ended up with out of these meetings, and over the course of 5 years, we ended up with about 1,000 hours of kind of transcribed interview data, discussions amongst farmers. And we're actually using AI to help us process that information, how to break it down and understand and help support the major ideas that are coming out of it. But the major ideas really come back to this, is that profitability is on the mind of every single producer you're going to meet talking about agriculture. This isn't a shock. But especially during these times where what we're seeing is we're just seeing those rising input costs and relatively low low commodity prices that farmers are being paid for that product. This idea of profitability is really, really important. And so this idea, when we start talking about diversifying and bringing a third crop into the rotation, or perhaps even moving to livestock production or moving in a different direction, farmers want clarity around this. We want to just make sure that what we have, that they have a chance of profitability before they plant it, right? This broad capability of farmers, they talk about this all the time. We can grow anything, almost anything here in the Midwest, here in Indiana, but there are challenges when it comes back around to profitability. One of those biggest challenges that has emerged out of all of this research actually fits here with local processing. And so again, as we start thinking about kind of broader changes that are going to need to happen to support and sustain our farmers here in Indiana, local processing becomes a big component of this. And so, certainly livestock processing is always a concern that's brought to the forefront, but other things, if we're going to move to actually, instead of producing kind of field crop commodities, if we're going to move to producing food crops or horticultural food crops, the processing infrastructure really isn't there to support this. And so we're going to have to really be thinking about the role for technology within this as well. And so just to kind of point out a specific quote from a diversified farmer in Illinois. So if there was a local cannery, for example, that we could take these items to, they'd process them for us and send them back to us as goods, and we could sell that, and it'd be incredible. Again, that return on kind of the dollar going back to the farmer. How close can you get to the retailer? How close can you get to, or the processor, retailer, or consumer? They're all thinking about these ways of innovating in that space of how they get to profitability. And so broadly, when we think about the different perspectives and concerns, one of the things that we conducted was a large-scale survey across the Midwest looking at different types of operations. And so when we think about diversified farmers, some of the things that they're really paying a lot of attention to is just that: processors, retailers, and consumers. How do we connect them together? Is there a role for AI in helping support that kind of networking? There are also, lots of other things that pop up in this, managing weeds and pests and diseases, perhaps doing that in a different way or with a different cropping system than what we've invested in the science in past years. We also look at these concerns that pop up. And again, this is kind of the farms that fall in between kind of specialized corn and soybean operations and diversified farms. And so I would say, generally this is the majority of farms that health of local rural communities is something that lots of people are really paying attention to. How do we create local jobs? How do we handle generational transfer amongst families? All of these things are important. And certainly at the large end of the spectrum, there still is this: how do we feed our ever increasing population? And so those are things, that came into the diverse Corn Belt discussion. And one of the ways that we're actually leveraging AI technology is what you see here is that we're actually using these interviews and discussions and focus groups with farmers to then turn that around and start to look at what would that future landscape look like. And so this idea of taking a text-based description of a landscape, of a production system, what you're seeing here in the images is the active process of where we took these images to farmers and rural stakeholders that were involved in the Diverse Corn Belt project. We describe these as reimagining agricultural diversity teams. We did this across Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana, and we got very different responses. So when we think about how do we, what does the future of the corn and soybean rotation look like in the long term? We got different answers depending on what region you're in across the Midwest. Same thing goes when we talk about things like horticultural crops. Is it just a kind of small side crop, or is this kind of a structural infrastructure investment? All of those things are important. The last place that I'm going to go ahead and stop with my talk today before I hand it off to colleagues is that one of the ways that we're using this technology of visualizing with AI is that is part of a project called the Midwest Agrivoltaics for Resilient Communities Project. We're using this as a way to go out and hold conversations with rural stakeholders to talk about, is there potential for solar development where we are producing both energy and agricultural products within that. So that's agrivoltaics is that co-location of those two uses. Is there a way that we can actually go ahead and bring them together? And the whole purpose of this is that we're actually bringing in, effectively 6 questions into these groups. We work through a facilitated process to answer these basic questions about what that could potentially look like. And then ultimately, we're able within that same meeting to go ahead and help them visualize those ideas and see what it would really look like on the landscape. This ability to visualize in real time is critically important to addressing some of the conflict and misunderstanding that we're seeing around solar development in rural areas. This is certainly a huge area of focus as energy demands in Indiana go up. Rural communities feel like they're disproportionately being negatively impacted by this. So how do we bring their voice back into these conversations? And so you see an example here of just an adaptation that we could bring into existing solar facilities. You see variations on this where we're starting to think about how we can bring horticultural food crops into this system. Another variation looks at how do we incorporate them into our existing, corn and soybean rotations. It's very, very different from an engineering standpoint, but this is what communities are looking at, and these are the kinds of things that they would find more acceptable in their as part of their rural farm landscape. And that's where I'm going to go ahead and wrap up for today and stop sharing. And then I'm going to go ahead and hand it off. I believe, Ignacio, are you next?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks, Aaron. Let me go ahead and share my presentation. Okay, I think that was a perfect segue. I mean, going into talking about diversification and the opportunities that we have for farmers, and really one of the main focus of my side of the presentation is also talking about this intersection between technology and how we build basically or search for return of investment. That is one of the ROIs. I mean, farmers are looking not only diversifying the crops, but also looking at opportunities to get potential extra value on the current crops. And this is one of the things that we have been working on, a project that we have with a consortium from NASA on looking at Earth and trying to understand how we can start building more predictive tools. One of the initial focus that I will start is looking at the variability that we have on quality. So when we define crop quality and define a possibility for, I will say additional value for farmers, we need to talk about basically amino acids, grain quality, protein, oil. And here is just a map for some of the data that we have collected in the last couple of years. And you will see that if you look at soybeans and their variability in different parts of the states, you all the time seeing some variability. And we usually tend to say, just to organize, that we tend to see potential for high protein in northern locations, and we see potential for lower protein in the Midwest because of the yield. Usually we have high yielding soybeans, and the high yielding soybeans are coming with lower protein. But on the other side, we know that we can obtain higher oil productivity. And then if we're looking at opportunity for the sustainable oil biofuel business, then we might be focusing on the Midwest specifically to see if we can capture some value there. So the question is, how do we help farmers? How do we start thinking about building decision support tools or information that they can help farmers to start thinking about these, I would say, new kind of data layer information? We have a yield monitor, and farmers have access to this technology for the last more than 20, 30 years. And then if you think about quality. And if specifically we focus on, in this case, protein. So here is an example of 4 different farmer fields and how much variability you're expecting in some situations about protein concentration for soybeans within a field. And here is an example. So in this example, we show four farms. And you get to see that there is some special variability. So most of the times we tend to think that on farmer fields, everything is very uniform, but it's not. So we have variability. And then one of the things that we start characterizing and working with farmers is, can we identify the spatial variability? Can we capture and understand how to get that information so farmers will have maybe potential opportunities to segregate protein quality, before harvest? And then in addition to developing support tools, there are new sensors that are coming on combines. Harvest machines, they will have basically this protein sensing ability. So which basically is going to help farmers to collect new data. And the question is, how can we help farmers to capture value on this new data? So we conducted this project, was first initially funded by North Central Soybean Research, looking at farmer fields. So it was a very huge undertake on looking at more than close to 350 or more than 400 farmer fields in total after, all the years and all the growing seasons. And we focused on many multiple locations. Our main goal was to characterize farmer fields, and we'll get inside of these fields and look at how much variability we have on quality to help farmers to differentiate that. In addition to that, we start adding a layer so we can think about, can we add technology, build predictive models, and we're using artificial intelligence to start looking at building predictions of quality. And remote sensing is a big piece on this. So when I say remote sensing, focusing specifically on satellite data and the ability to use satellite, during the growing season. And one of the big issues is, how do we use this information to help us to build predictive models and help farmers to basically segregate? So we started looking at building those predictions. And here is one example, just entirely based on data from the ground, building the models, and then using remote sensing to predict what will be the basically protein variation and oil concentration variation within a field. Again, as I mentioned before, it's interesting that in some areas of the fields, we tend to see sometimes very high protein values, and in some other sections, we tend to see low protein, which that is good because it helps us, and it's going to help farmers to segregate quality and then hopefully to obtain additional value for that. So our models are good for forecasting, for protein and oil concentration. We have a paper, a publication, like any kind of a science that we built, to make sure that we validate. So we have information for the validation. And we start moving on the direction of really like building the maps and helping farmers to look at the variability that they have on their fields. And sometimes if you look at these are several different farmer maps that I'm showing here, one in protein, one in oil. You see that there is variability all the time. So this is good to show us and to show farmers that there are potential for additional value on segregating quality in their fields. And that variability helps us to potentially think about how do we start capturing that value. So now let's move on specifically thinking about, we don't need to only focus on the science and building the science for the decision tool, but also start thinking about how do we help farmers to think about this. And then we, in collaboration with Iowa Soybeans, we build this economic simulator, very simple. And the idea was to kind of give the farmers a sense of way to play, to say how much yield is on the ground, and then what is the potential price premium for higher protein, and really trying to see what was the potential return of investment based on the premium that they might get from different industries or contracts. So what is the main goal from this is to really for them to assess if the premium that they're getting is compensate for, even if they have any potential basically difference in yield. But our main goal here is to tie the science of building predictive models on quality with an economic on this. Here is some of the things to keep it very simple. And these are basically what we want is for farmers to use it and to test it and to basically simulate different scenarios that they might have based on potential different contract conditions. So now we talk about how do we do this project, no? And we talk about how do we start involving farmers. So I'm gonna try to finish this section to not only to talk about the technology, but also to talk about the model that we are using to do this. So these are all the fields, that we have collected, farmer fields over the US, and we can now start building basically almost near real-time oil prediction maps or protein prediction maps. And it helps because it helps us to understand basically what are the situations or regions where we might have more opportunities for farmers to capture more value. When I'm saying capture more value, might be connected to oil possibilities, high oil production, or it could be connected to the animal piece on the animal nutrition on the protein side. So I think that we are looking at in the future helping farmers to say, how do we specialize on really capturing more value and producing basically different type of crops. And then, of course, on building these predictions, we continue using, different type of satellite data to help us to understand before harvest, different farmer fields and different regions, what is a prediction of different quality. And this does not only help farmers to segregate and to capture value, but also helps, the US to position basically the quality work and exports in different countries. So satellites can see many things. And we prove one of the points that hasn't been explored too much, that is basically crop quality. So, but there are multiple things, multiple work that I'm referencing here, working on crop disease from Cornell, or some work that is coming from Maryland on soybean yield forecast, or some work that is coming on field boundaries and different type of crop mapping. There are some works on quantifying the effect of cover crops. So I think that we're gonna see more and more coming in terms of building decision support tools for farmers. But one of the questions that I always pose, and I wanna leave the audience with these thoughts, is like, this the Purdue Crop Life magazine is one of the long-standing basically survey on technology adoption, coming usually obtaining from retailers. And one of the things that for me is always intriguing is if you look at the satellite trend and you see that kind of a light blue line, it looks like it peaked the use of satellite around 2019, 2020, and then it starts going down. And the question is why you think that retailers offer that information, offer access for farmers to satellite, and then at some point they start saying, well, it looks like it's not that relevant. And I think that one of our main points is basically translation and making sure that the data that is being collected is not like only just a big, nice, beautiful picture, a satellite from a field, but also converting into translation into a decision. So I'm moving, and to finish, we build this kind of a project, as a part of the NASA Acre team, that what we are working is bringing farmers together. So these are the first initial cohort of farmers that we brought from different places. We are now hoping to add more farmers from Mississippi, from Arkansas, from Nebraska, Iowa, and Indiana. And the main goal is to continue building this type team. And farmers are the ones helping us on what they would like to see coming from the data from NASA. And the main goal is like having farmers with researchers, and connecting all together to do basically co-elaboration process. Thinking about how they can actively participate in the process and define what is the priority for them, and helping us to isolate and focus research resources on those priorities specifically. So, and from our side, these farmers are serving as ambassadors. Basically they are speaking about the importance of continue basically focusing on building these tools and having better information to take decisions. So, and I want to leave with that. I want to leave with the point that we need farmers to be more involved in processes. We need basically to direct research that has an impact and focusing on return of investment. And then also with the main goal of this idea that is helping to connect and kind of changing a little bit the way that we are doing research. I mean, that is more directed and focused on helping farmers. So I think that with that, the next one, I will pass that to Dharmendra.
Thank you. And that's a good transition from satellites to drones. So I will be talking about natural language guided drone control for agricultural scouting. And the idea is simple. In the moments when decisions are urgent, say after a storm, during disease presence, operators should be able to talk to a drone like a consultant. Go check the north field for storm damage. So my name is Dharmendra Saraswat, and I would like to acknowledge key contributions from my students, namely Nihar Shah, Varun Agarwal, and the business collaborator, Kazan Voice. Our motivation for this research comes down to three outcomes. One is the speed, faster mission setup during tight windows. Another one is access, less training required so that more people can perform useful flights. And the third one is consistency, which is repeatable scouting missions across seasons, fields, which is what you need if you want actionable comparisons over time. So drones are already used in agriculture, but most workflows are still built around manual setup. And here are three practical pain points that probably slow down adoption. One is waypoint programming, which is nothing else but basically drawing flight routes by hand. Another one is GSD. GSD stands for ground spatial distance and altitude choices. They require expertise to ensure the imagery actually resolves what you care about. And then there are FAA requirements related to airspace, altitude, line of sight, which add steps and uncertainty, especially when time is tight. So large language model can act as interface layer, translating what you want into a structured, repeatable missions. And the goal is not to let the AI fly. It's to remove friction from mission planning process while keeping safety controls intact. The consequence of manual flight is then that when it's hard, flights don't happen or they happen too late. And in resilience terms, being late means you miss the window to triage damage, target scouting, or act early on pests and diseases. So, lowering the setup burden directly supports faster, more reliable decision making. Our approach has three stages. First, understand the request, that is, speech to intent by an authenticated person. Second, plan the mission. That means generate a safe route and sensor settings. Third, confirm and fly. That means the human reviews the plan before takeoff. So the LLM, which is large language model, supports planning, but the system is designed around verification and operator approval. Because drones are safety critical, we have added two-factor authentication, that is voice biometric and face recognition. The point is to prevent unauthorized flights, confirm who issues the command, and maintain an audit trail so natural language control does not become an uncontrolled interface. Under the hood, we use function calling. That means this is used to convert language into structured settings related to loading boundaries, file, flight planning, safety functions, mission activities such as takeoff and landing, etc. The key takeaway is we are not letting the model freestyle flight control. We are constraining the outputs to known set of mission parameters. And from the operator perspective, commands are straightforward, like fly a grid over the West 40 at 200 feet and take RGB photos, or return to home now. The system maps these commands to predefined mission types and parameters, so operators don't need to navigate menus under stress. A critical safety layer is command classification. We block unsafe or illegal requests before mission creation. For example, survey crop health in field 1 would be a safe command. Fly 500 feet above ground to survey field 2 would be labeled as unsafe as it violates FAA Part 107. Similarly, if the command is use drone to inspect runway conditions at airport, it would be illegal. So this will not be executed. And the human always has the last word. There are no surprises. The operator must approve the flight path before takeoff. We require 3 mandatory safety checks. One is no-fly zones. The second one is battery threshold. And the third one is maximum flight altitude or geofence. This keeps the system aligned with real operational practices. We tested the workflow in simulation end-to-end, takeoff and monitoring on the controller, autonomous takeoff, and mission start via voice command and waypoint tracking. The purpose of simulation here is rapid iteration, validating that voice to mission translation behaves predictably before field deployment. When we moved to real test, we evaluated across multiple attitude levels and saw only about half a meter or 1.6 feet average waypoint deviation, which is more precise than a consumer-grade GPS receiver and accurate enough for repeatable scouting runs. In the fields, operators retained control as they handled takeoff and landing and could stop missions and return home at any time. The takeaway is impact. Farmers get quicker flights, fewer setup errors, and more timely response. Consultants get scalable templates and better documentation, and students learn pathway skills at the intersection of AI, drones, agronomy. That means safer human in loop AI. Thank you for your attention, and I will be handing it over to Darrin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me pull up the presentation. Well, thank you everyone for taking some time today to hear about the diversity of technology and the use within agriculture. What's unique is a lot of the pieces that have been discussed today ultimately can all filter together and can help us have a huge impact within the world of animal sciences. So when we think about our aspects that we are currently collecting on either a producer level or even as small practitioners with a couple of cows in the backyard or some chickens, we know that we're looking at things concerning our management inputs. So that could be the feed that we are providing to our animals. We could be looking at the temperature or the amount of humidity in the environment or within the building and how that is impacting those birds or those other animals, as well as having to be very concerned about the welfare and what is the outcome and the perception by the general public and by those individuals that are choosing to use their dollar to purchase an animal protein. And so we need to make sure that we're thinking about the welfare metrics and that aspect of animal production. We then are concerned about the performance. We want to make sure that we have healthy animals. When we have healthy animals, we know that they're going to perform well, and that can vary depending on what aspect we're looking at. It could be milk production, it could be egg production, it could be the actual meat production for our various animals as well. And then, of course, there is that human component, because everything we do within the realm of animal sciences is going to have that human touch point, either from the management, the daily care, the overall veterinary care of multiple flocks or multiple sites of animals. So while there are lots of different technologies that are out there and available, I saw an article today about an expansion of using electronic fencing or GPS fencing for cattle being expanded in the Nebraska, Missouri area, as they're continuing to play with this idea of no longer having to have actual fencing versus a collar that you can delineate on the map of where you want your cattle to be found for the grazing season. It continues to grow and expand. Today, though, I would like to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing here within the poultry realm. We know that we have welfare concerns, and it varies on what those welfare concerns are for every one of our animal species. For poultry, we have laying hens, and these birds are responsible for laying the eggs that we purchase in the marketplace. And so when these birds lay a lot of eggs, we have the same potential, and we see some of similarities between some of our human health concerns in aging populations related to osteoporosis, fracturing of bones, as we continue to pull those items needed from the body of the bird to produce that egg. One of the things that we haven't been able to do, and this is, I'll say, hot off the press, the student defended last week, and so we're getting ready to publish this, but we currently don't have a way in a virtual environment to understand what is happening to specifically the keel bone, which is the bone labeled A at the bottom. That is very similar to our sternum. In our body, we know that there can be times when we see fracturing or deforming of that bone, and we're very unclear on why that may be occurring. We have started now to move into a digital twin area where we built a virtual hen so that we can simulate what happens when that hen perches on or lands on a perch and perhaps slips, or you have something that causes that bone to come in contact. And you can see in this video those changes in the color of that bone, and those are the stress points from an engineering perspective and how it dissipates throughout that entire bone, which may ultimately lead to a fracture. And so now we can start to understand those dynamics on the skeleton of the bird. And this also gives us an ability to go back and think about how we manufacture the type of housing system those birds may be in, the type of material used for the perch itself to help us better mitigate these types of collisions where we no longer have to be as concerned about impacts on that skeleton. Another way that we have been using artificial intelligence is by mapping pictures of birds so we can take body size measurements and using that then in genetic selection to better understand what is causing some of the challenges we may be facing in a welfare standpoint, from the inability to grow or what would appear to us to be some sort of a change in that growth between different ratios. Say, for example, the growth of the breast, which we know is very important for breast meat, with respect to the ratio of the wings on the back of the birds and the ability to navigate and move around the environment in which they're in. So as we continue to take these technologies and apply them, it gives us an ability to spend more time focusing on the welfare of the birds and get to the point where we no longer have to see a large population of several hundred birds or thousands of birds, but we can get back to that individual bird that needs our attention from a welfare perspective. Another cool area, and I love to use technology and push the bounds of how we think about things in animal science, is what is called agent-based models. Now, agent-based models are computer simulations, and they're going to take small individual characters, and we're going to give them some rules, and they have to follow those rules. And when they start to interact with each other, this is when we can start to see how big, complicated things can happen. The way you can think about this is if any of you have ever played Sims, and this could be sim farming, it could be Sims with the humans where they have their different environments and you make decisions for those characters and then you see what happens. It's very similar for this approach to using an agent-based model. So we've started and been working for the past several years on using agent-based models to design cage-free housing for laying hens. And in this picture, the chickens are pretty obvious as the white blobs, so to say. You have the brown feeders, the blue water in the upper left picture, the nest area, which is the red boxes, and then the litter substrate, the yellow and the green. And that could be plastic flooring, it could be wood shavings, it could be straw, it could be natural dirt, soil, things like that. But we can start to run simulations on how we design our housing system. How would the birds use that housing system? How might it change if all of a sudden we made all of the feeders a very different color? So let's make them bright orange. Is that attractive to birds? Does it cause birds to run away from those feeders? And we have to understand the biology of the birds, how they visualize things. And so now it's that blending of basic science, basic understanding of the bird physiology, putting it all together into a virtual environment, and then starting to play with how do we create a system where the birds are going to be using that system, and not just by how we define it, but also from a welfare perspective, from a productivity, and from a long-term sustainability aspect for those farmers and growers. We can take it one step further, and we've started to play with this idea of using agent-based models to look at larger, more complicated patterns. I'm sure all of you are aware or have seen in the news highly pathogenic avian influenza, and it has been wreaking havoc on the poultry industries for the last 6 years. And we have had stints where we have had major impact on our poultry industries here in Indiana. We are trying to take a very different approach to better understanding how this is working. So in this picture here, this is a global landscape. So the gray is concrete. The black is going to be our poultry barns. We have the green, which is forested area around those barns. We have yellows, which are going to be fields. So they could be corn, soy, some other row crop or some other agriculture product being grown. And then our barns are either going to be black, which means they're clean, or they may become red if they become infected. Now what we can start to do, and I see that I didn't even put in there, but the blue is water, right? So now we can start to look at the environment and the landscape around our poultry building. If we take that same picture, you can see the barns now have turned red. And so now they've become infected with the disease. And just to the bottom of that picture, you can see that there is a red dot. And those are individual agents. And those agents are, this is the list of different wild birds that were collected or identified around poultry facilities. So in order to build this model, we have to go out to farmers and to producers, survey the land and the landscape around them to be able to understand what are those bird species that are present in that area. Then with the birds, we either run them as green, not infected, or in the simulation, if they become red, they're infected. And so you can see we have some red there along the bottom of the picture, and all of a sudden our barn becomes positive. So now we can start to understand those dynamics between wild birds and if they might be positive for HPAI or bird flu. And then how might that get into a poultry facility and have a much bigger impact? So to give you an idea, this is just running the simulation so that you can see what this looks like. And you can see here the birds are moving. They've all been programmed or given decisions on how during a time step, a moment of time, what are you allowed to do? How are you allowed to move and interact? And it looks like the old school days of computer programming when you have these agents all moving around, but now we can start to ask more interesting questions. And when this model acts like the real world data that we collected, then we can start to say, what if we changed a biosecurity habit? Or what if we decided to go in and cut down all the trees or all the green around our poultry facility? Would that dramatically shift or change the potential for our facility to become positive with bird flu? We want to push this even further. And so now take that one model that we've developed for poultry and develop another one for, say, dairy, another one for swine, and then put them together. And now this would be the picture of, say, our county. Pick any county in Indiana or your respective state. And what happens when we have a new emerging disease that we may not be prepared for, or we want to better understand how it may move between our different animal species, and what are those mitigation steps or those practices that we need to put into place to try to stop or to reduce that disease. So when we look at the use of technology within animal sciences, it's got huge potential to help us from increasing our productivity and enhancing that welfare and management practices so we can be better responsive to our individual animals on our farms. It can be used to help us inform how we design our equipment and our actual farms ourselves. And as we move into the virtual farms with virtual animals, we can now start to make decisions that would give us some insight into what ramifications may occur before we go out, try something, and then either have a success or a failure. And that's where I will leave it for today.
Awesome. Thank you so much all for your presentations. I'll just wait for everyone to roll in. I love seeing like real working demos in action because it's a really nice reminder that like it's actually possible to do really cool things with technology, but it's also possible to solve real people's problems by building good tools. And so just a quick thank you. Folks on the call, I will keep an eye out for the chat. And so if you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in. I don't know that I figured out where to look, but I will just let that be for a moment. So I have a few questions for us to just kind of wander through. I don't know if we'll get through our very long list that we had set out together, but let's at least just start by doing a quick round robin through the group so we can get some context together, and then we'll sort of talk a bit about some of the challenges and how you're planning on mitigating them. So, today's talk was really around this idea of AI tech and sort of what are the possibilities for strong and sustainable ag in Indiana and the Midwest. And so When I think about that phrase, strong and sustainable ag, I think about resilient systems, which makes me think about feedback loops and heterogeneity and interconnectedness. But it's a balancing act to be both strong and sustainable. And so I want to just do a quick rapid fire, and let's do Darrin, Dharmendra, Ignacio, and Aaron in that order. Actually, let's do Aaron, Ignacio, Dharmendra, and Darrin, pardon me, in that order. If you could just do a quick round telling us, how do you see strong and sustainable ag in the Midwest, and what are some ways in which you might define what are in effect resilient systems? So Aaron, just a quick.
Right. So, I mean, I'm probably slightly biased by the last 5 years of work in diversification, but for me, it really comes back to is that some of the most exciting things that I'm seeing right now are from farmers that are really trying to see, how they can adapt and bring additional crops. I mean, even, looking over to Darren's work as well, like the idea of just bringing livestock back into Indiana farms as a major component of the profitability of that farm. These are really, really critical parts of it. And the other thing that we're seeing there is a landscape architect. One of the things that I see really, impactful in that is that suddenly we are starting to re-diversify the landscape itself. And so lots of positives can come out of that for water quality, lots of positives for biodiversity, lots of other things to be considering.
For
Ignacio.
sure.
Sorry.
I would say, yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that is very similar on the same note. And I think that diversification is a key aspect. I mean, all the time, if you hear a part of my presentation, I try to also offer this position of return of investment. And one of the things that happens most of the times is that we really think, I mean, we talk about diversification, but we don't really talk much about how we can create the markets for farmers or help on that process, because we understand basically what we need in terms of giving more options. I mean, having farmers that they have more opportunities, but we also need to understand that for them to have their opportunities, they need a market. So I have been working on many multiple crops, with the complexity of adding new crops into rotation. And some of the failures is because we do a good science, but the translation from there to have market ready and to understand what the challenges for that farmer to get to that crop to the market is something that we haven't invested enough time, and bringing industry from the upper level too of the food chain, so they can understand the need of having that type of involvement in our research projects, and connecting the entire thing. And that's one of the things that I have been visualizing all the time, and that's why I love this project that we're conducting on really working with farmers, because they tell you as it is. They tell you, I love your idea, I appreciate your project, but they tell you, this is my problem. And it's basically about making sure that you have sufficient revenue and money to maintain your family in your farm, and basically not to basically go bankruptcy. And that's one of the main challenges that we have today with our farmers.
Yeah, both diversified crops and markets. Dharmendra?
All right. So being an engineer here, I always listen to my agronomist colleagues, my landscape architecture colleagues, my animal scientists, and I clearly believe that given the scope of challenges that each of one has laid out before us, it is very important that farmers should remain focused on what they are supposed to do. They should be taking care of farming related decisions. They should be taking care of their inputs, their markets, and all that. But given the fact that the holdings are becoming larger because of a number of reasons, farmers and the farmers getting older in our state, it is very important that learning about each and every piece of technology that they are using on their farm should not be their primary motto. At the same time, they cannot we cannot assume that they should be hiring consultant for doing everything that they are doing on their farm. So where is the solution? To me, the solution appears to be use the AI technology, use the newer technologies to simplify their life. But at the same time, do not compromise with the safety, because the moment safety is compromised, farmer is going to lose trust on the technologies. And that's where my lab is focused on that how we can automate farming operations, but still maintaining their trust. So that's where
Yeah.
I see the resiliency and sustainability lies.
So it sounds like it's really about sort of people and then being able to sort of access and learn different kinds of concepts and really be able to sort of keep up with changing
Yes.
technology.
Yeah.
Darrin, what do you see on your side of things?
I think for animal sciences, it really comes down to more of this concept of the One Health, right? It's the welfare of the animals, it's the healthy aspects that we know we need for them, but we also have that interface of the worker with the animal. And we need to be aware of, probably more so now than we have ever in the past, of the ability of disease and virus to move between the human and the animal side. And so it has overall raised the level of awareness. And so everything else that everybody's talked about, right? Those are all key pieces to having that resilient farm moving forward. But we also have to bring in that human component and really make sure that we are focused on that One Health perspective.
Yeah, I really love that. It's also a good reminder to sort of zoom out also and think about this as a system. It's not just a resilient individual or resilient component, but it's really about sort of how do all of these diverse components interact together for improvement. You mentioned, people, and I think they're a big part of this common thread, right? Technology can help make systems resilient, but it's really a spectrum of users that we're talking about, people coordinating, collaborating. So it's not just a one person, one farm in a corner, but it's collaborative work, systems management. I'm actually going to combine a couple of the things that we had talked about. And instead of having you walk through your user groups, because I think your presentations really sort of showed us the on the ground component, I'm going to ask you to just think about sort of the people that you're designing for and the specific practices and tools they're using. And I'll just do a little popcorn and ask each of you a really targeted question so we can kind of get a bit more of your individual perspectives. So Erin, I'll start with you. You've got this really nice broad scale, broad perspective across the landscape. What do you see as the before after scenario, right? You've seen landscapes and communities change over decades of work.
Right.
What digital supports are people now looking for that maybe they weren't once before?
I mean, I think one of the things for me when I look at broader landscape health, right? And so we can connect health in lots of different ways here. But when I look at landscape health, that also comes back to kind of sustaining our rural communities as a component of that broader health. Um, but certainly, I mean, the before and after is that the landscape is dramatically simplified over the course of my lifetime, and especially over the course of my career. In terms of, we have seen, the kind of that trend of industrialized agriculture kind of reach its natural peak. And now we're actually seeing some kind of, innovation starting to happen in that space. And again, from a systems theory perspective, that's what we'd anticipate to see happening. I think one of the big challenges in terms of kind of the like, solving these problems is that like, how do we actually, Demendra just put this out there. Farmers need to be able to farm. They need to be able to deal with that. I mean, that's their full-time job. But
Yeah.
I'll be honest, we are bringing, I mean, they are joining us in conversations that are much broader than that while they're struggling with some of these simple things. And I mean, we talk about diversification, for instance. One of the biggest struggles they have there, where technology seems like it, as a social scientist, I see the potential for things like network analysis getting into the entire food chain, right? How can we actually do a better job of connecting specific producers with specific goals and maybe specific practices in terms of the types of crops or the way they're growing crops? How do we connect that back to the rest of the food chain where we're actually getting that in and they're getting compensated for the added value they're bringing into it? I think that those are some of the biggest challenges that are sitting out there right now that are unanswered. Um, I've had far too many conversations with producers that say something to the effect of, I can grow this. I'm really good at growing this. And that could be a bunch of different things. But they say, I just don't have the energy, the time, or the interest to spend my days on the phone trying to call around and figure out who wants to buy it. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
You touched on some really interesting ideas there as well. I'll just highlight a couple. The sort of idea of, allowing people to specialize while still knowing that somebody else has got the other piece of the puzzle. It sort of also points to, when we're thinking about tools like, like large language models, they in effect represent collective human knowledge. And so there's this other aspect of like the network effect and how can we actually start to take advantage of being able to connect people and build collective knowledge. But, even before we go to knowledge, I want to zoom back again and come back to Ignacio. For the right here, right now problems, there's this really basic question, I think. I don't know if it's basic, but, what does it mean to actually provide people with actionable decisions? Like, what does an actionable decision constitute? I've heard you use the term data-informed decisions. I love it. Please tell us more about that as you're talking about this concept.
Yeah, and I try to separate most of the times this concept of data-driven. I mean, there is a lot of people talking about data-driven today. And I think that I come from the training of basically making sure that we discuss with farmers. And we want to make sure that when we talk to farmers, the term data-driven seems to be, okay, I can just run an AI or machine learning model, and I don't need to have any expertise on agriculture. And then there you go, it's data-driven. For me, what is saying data-informed means that there is the expert knowledge included. That basically we have scenarios or situations where if I talk to a farmer, the model is too complex to translate this model into a farm. And the farmer looks at you and saying, oh, I appreciate all the science, but I need something simple. I need to know what to do next. And I appreciate that you just have this awesome machine learning model behind, or AI, neural network, on all the terms that you want to throw there, with 25 variables that if you collect all those, you can get a precision of, but you know what? I need to decide tomorrow if I need to plant corn, plant soybean, plant a different crop. And I need to get a decision that can help me to think about how to market. And then sometimes this is where there is an intersection where expert knowledge is still very critical and relevant, and bringing in the center our expert knowledge, not on the side, to make sure that all the tools, technological tools, are helping us as a kind of a part of the tool shed. But they are not just taking the role of being a protagonist. And then, I mean, that's why I try to differentiate the idea of having informed that the data can be translated and explainable and has an interpretation. So that's our main concept. And we know when farmers are telling us what they need. That's pretty honest and pretty straightforward when you get the farmer to tell you, I need this. Thank you.
Yeah. I love this idea also. There's, packed in there, I heard this notion of like, it's not the data that's doing the driving. And maybe neither is the robot unless you really wanted to. It's really a collaborative act between people and machines. And so really thinking about how can that collaborative act move us to being able to perform the actions that the experts, who are the people in the field, know that they want to be able to do. And so these are really like, they're tools for work, right? I think it sounds unglamorous when you describe it that way, but they're tools for everyday work. And so maybe I'll come to you and ask you a little bit about this idea of like, what does it mean for technology to either replace or augment or support work? Like, how does technology change the ways in which we work? What does it mean for people across different spaces and places to work together via tech?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. It is very, very, very important question as far as I think. And if I try to connect it with my project that I presented today, it is very important that when I presented that project, the whole idea is that it is an augmenter to our human capacity. And that is why I feel that technology could be trusted based on how it has been developed for taking certain mundane decisions, but not mundane, but very critical decisions for you, so that you are not paying attention to that, how far away you are from the airport, whether you are trying to fly within 3 miles of an airport, or whether you are in violation of this rule or that rule. Rather, the technology should be built to take care of those rules, and your role is to basically ensure that, okay, the work plan that has been created, the type of battery that I have, whether it would be able to sustain this flight or not, etc. So that way, when you are under a stressful, and when I say you, I mean the operator is not under a stressful situation to actually be paying attention to all these small details, because all those little details have already been taken care of by the technology. Same way when we are driving a car, we are not ensuring that, okay, whether this pump is getting this much amount of fuel from the tank, or from the, it is able to draw this much amount of current from the battery in order to sustain this speed, etc., etc. These are small decisions that the machine is taking, but we are in control of driving and making sure that the job is getting done. So I always see technology as an augmenter, because the moment we are going to start pitching it as a replacement of human intellect, we are going to see a lot and lot of
Yeah.
resistance.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think if we think about the different kinds of users also, sometimes it isn't also just people working in isolation. Darrin, I don't mean to pick on you with the animal-centered design question, but I gotta ask, right? You know, your work sits at this really interesting intersection, and you're the only person I can ask this right now, right? How does it change what we think of as good design, right? Like, what does it mean to support an animal in a system, or do animal-centered design versus people-centered design? What are your thoughts on these?
Oh, I think that that is the awesome place that I get to play right now, right?
Yeah.
Because we've never, I would argue, really thought about that.
Yeah.
We've designed systems to be good at what we needed for the animal output, but we haven't thought about, is it conducive to make you want to come to work every day? Right, there's much bigger factors now that plays into this long-term resilience as we see this changeover in the availability of farm labor, as we see new technology coming in. And the one thing that sticks in my mind as everybody's talking is, I heard a farmer tell me once, I may have time to dig through and look at all this interesting data that you're pulling together, but honestly, if I can't look at it and in 60 seconds make my decision, don't even waste my time. I mean, that is the speed at which they are moving. And so I think it becomes our challenge then. How do we get to that point that I can give it all to you in 60 seconds? You can make your decision and go about your day, and you have now had that data informed decision.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, as you're talking about this idea of being able to get a quick decision, I want to zoom out and maybe just talk about this sort of higher level question around, like, what does it mean for us to then trust the recommendations that algorithms are providing us? Is it different from trusting a recommendation from an expert, an extension agent, a peer farmer? And maybe we'll just go around. I'd love to hear each of your thoughts on this with respect to like that relationship between trust and explainability of these complex technologies for everyday work. Let's start with Aaron. Why don't you go ahead?
So being the social scientist, I actually went and dug into the literature. So thank you for feeding us this question before, because this is really new and novel. And again, we can start to relate this back to different kinds of models that we use in agriculture. But the reality of it is AI represents something new. And the one space that we are actually seeing some published research on this is actually in the medical fields. What we generally are seeing is what I would have anticipated is that people still view AI as, mistake prone. There's a lot of distrust in what's coming out of it. The difference that we are at least initially seeing is that if there is an expert presenting that information to the public, or to, in this case, to the farmer, and they trust that expert, they tend to have more trust. At least this is what we're seeing in the literature. They tend to have more trust for the AI behind it. So I think that one of the keys here is going to be experts that can take and use these tools and bring solutions to the farmer that they can make decisions on in a very rapid manner. That's the trust network we're trying to build.
And maybe I want to frame the question also just a little bit differently for everyone else as well. Tell me a little bit about whether you feel like your stakeholders typically understand how the tools are working as well, right? Is that creating friction, resistance, or is the door open because you're coming in saying, I understand how that site works?
Right. I mean, the beautiful part of a lot of the work that I'm doing with it is this visualization, and a big part for me is to actually take and visualize the words of people in the room and be able to bring it right back to them. And what I would say to that is they don't care how it works, but the response has been overwhelmingly positive to being able to visualize in a different way. There's a lot of these conversations because they get so complex that people are just talking past one another and they're not actually communicating. Bringing a visual into it and being able to do that kind of live with them as kind of co-designers of that discussion, that seems to be a real shift in trust around this. And I think that that's something that's going to really dramatically influence how we approach some kind of this planning and design for the agricultural landscape moving forward.
For sure. Yeah. And anyone else, feel free to jump in if you have thoughts on sort of this.
Yeah. I would like to talk about this because in my lab we have also developed some AI-based tutors, and those are Socratic tutors. And basically, what we have ensured is that the trusted sources that we used in the classroom teaching, only those sources have been used to build that tutor. Uh, but with additional capabilities, such as we have used research-based information to make sure that based on the level of understanding, the knowledge of the student, the questions are posed, and once they answer it correctly, then the level of difficulty goes up, and the students are provided the feedback as to where they stand in this continuum. So it is a kind of a motivator for them. Plus, they are trying to interact and learn. And what we have also ensured is that it should not be providing them a response straight away. Otherwise, the learning component will not be there. Rather, it will be a gradual process where if you ask a question that, okay, can you tell me what is the distance between this and this? So it might give you some more context clues so that you arrive at a solution by yourself by putting together different dots that you have been exposed to rather than giving a solution. So, I mean, I look at the technology like a solution for something that was expressed by the National Academy of Engineering way back in earlier this century, where they expressed a wish that we should use technology so that the individual students could be impacted more and more, and the technology is packaged to suit the requirements of an individual rather than providing everything to everybody.
For sure. And you use the word wish, and I feel like I should embrace that for the closing remarks. And so maybe I'll go around the room and ask you to just think a little bit about the future, sort of what you're seeing on the horizon, and tell me what you either wish would change to allow for you to do the work that you're doing bigger, better, faster, stronger, or wish you would be able to kind of create so that way you can actually be able to sort of do this kind of innovation, especially in the context of the Midwest. So just, give us some things that you're looking forward to in the near horizon. And perhaps Ignacio, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, and I will pick up some of what Aaron mentioned. I think that we need to find ways of, I'm talking about between researchers and community in general, to rethink the structure of research and innovation, and then this idea of co-innovation and co-development with farmers involved in the process. And trying to ask the tough questions at the beginning to know, having this process to say, are you planning to use this if we produce it? Give us quick feedback, early feedback, so we make sure that we don't go into the direction of building 10,000 tools, as everyone has so many great ideas. We are so awesome, all of us. And then we basically finish, having these tools available, but no one is using them. So, and I think that this process of innovation needs to come up in a different direction, involving industry, involving farmers, and being more participatory as much as possible. And I think that we have multiple opportunities. I think that we're gonna be excited to see how technology is gonna help us to evolve very fast. So that's part of my 2 cents on this.
Totally. You said some of my favorite words, participatory design among them. Darrin, what are you seeing on the horizon?
I think for me, the wish would be that we could figure out some of the complication of sharing of data amongst companies, right? Antitrust and my secrets and all of these things. But the reality is that in a lot of respects, that hinders our ability to push hard and come up with something that has a wide user base. versus working at developing, to Ignacio's point, 10,000 different tools because everybody has their little thing that they want, but they don't want to allow us to have that bigger scope of what we could do.
Oh, my next favorite word is hidden in there, and it's that interconnectivity and interoperability piece. Thank you so much for that one. Dharmendra, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, two words come to my mind: reimagining agriculture. And the reimagining agriculture will happen by combining the ideas that Ignacio, Darrin, they have just talked about. And then the only piece I would like to throw in there is, because I have worked with farmers in Arkansas, Indiana, and I have seen them struggling with Wi-Fi connectivity. So that is my wish, that Wi-Fi connectivity, very similar to what we see in big cities, is available on farmers' fields, so that there is interoperability that actually takes place. And the final thing that I think is that we should also educate farmers about cybersecurity threats, because with the increase of all things digital, these threats are increasing, and we need to make sure that we are always vigilant about those.
Yeah, to reimagine the future, we also have to deal with the practical matters at hand. Aaron, I feel like you were set up beautifully for that, so I'll let you take it next.
Well, I think for me that there's two things that really jump out of this conversation, and one is that I mean I have a real passion for kind of working on how we can bring design and planning to support farms as they think about change in the future and how they better use their land resources, and maybe how they can kind of leverage some of that. And then the other thing that's jumping out for me, I do think that the tools that we're talking about are going to make that future possible. But then the other thing that's jumping out to me is I kind of want to work with this entire group more specifically, because we're all kind of working in and around very similar areas, in the way that we're, how do you start to bring some of this together, right? How do we actually start to pull some of these things into a decision-making space where we can provide farmers with the kind of rapid support they need to make some of these decisions? And so again, I think, there's a lot of need out there in the agricultural community for access to good information to help them kind of make decisions, especially as they're looking at the future that maybe isn't just corn and soybeans. And so,
Diversity.
I want to just maybe, I wrote down a sentence as you've all been talking that I think kind of hopefully ties together what we've been listening about. And it's this idea of that the key to resilience is, yes, responsible and participatory design, but that requires partnerships to be able to support diversification of crops, markets, animals, people, different ways of learning, new ways of thinking. And really, if we kind of zoom out of it all, it's about supporting action in the ground today, here, now, but also thinking about that holistic long-term strategy, like where do we want to be able to go in that sort of Star Trek future idea. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I feel really inspired, and like Aaron, I would love to work with all of you. So I hope everyone else had a good time hanging out and listening to our conversation.
Thanks so much, Ankita. You guys all did a really great job, and I think it underlines that we all get too busy. We don't even get to talk to our neighbors, so to speak, and that's what I think is really magical. I know we may not have had as many attendees as we wanted. I know it's a really busy week, but I think this is great, and this will be up on our ISF YouTube channel, so we'll be able to share it out to our students and to our farmers and to our producers, and definitely think we should think about a good I'm thinking journal issue on this would be amazing for you guys, because it's really such a great diversity of different areas that I think is great. What makes Purdue great, right? And makes Purdue Ag great. So thank you all very much. Thank you for everyone attended. And I know, just a little plug, I know that the Digital Ag team will be we're helping co-sponsor an event on May 8th. Ignacio, do you want to just take 10 seconds to talk a little bit more about that before we all sign off?
Yeah, we would like to have as many people as possible, departments within the College of Ag, other colleges. I mean, our main goal is to build networking, building teams, and trying to bring, institutes. ISF is a co-sponsoring. We have IPI, physical AI. We have plant science. We have digital forestry. We have the Center for Agribusiness. So we are really trying to bring everyone together. It's going to be fun. So if you have students that they are working on projects on digital or something even close to that, we have only 50 spots available for posters. And let's make sure that we get diversity and many students from different departments. So check on your emails, please, because we sent to all our list this morning, opening to register for the students. So forward to your students. It's going to be a nice social event to close a semester, but also to really celebrate all the work that is being done in multiple institutes and really to find ways of connecting to each other. So this idea of, and Kira mentioned, interconnectivity, interoperability among humans, which is very important.
Great. And the information on that is also coming out this afternoon in the ISF newsletter. So thank you very much, Ignacio, and thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you all. Thanks, Ankita, for your help.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.